Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Burns talking. How are you today? Welcome again to today's webinar. Advance, Megan, please. For clarification, I'll first begin discussing what manual we'll be referencing for today's webinar. For clarification, for children and teens between 5 and 17 years of age, up to the teen's 18th birthday, we use Personal Outcome Measures Manual for Children and Youth. After the teen's 18th birthday, we use Personal Outcome Measures Manual, or POMS for adults. In the Children and Youth Manual, there's still 21 outcomes and 21 supports. There are also the same areas we look at, type and frequency, when we think about interview considerations. These are the same for both children and youth POMS and adult POMS. There are 11 outcomes for children and youth that are both for children and their families, which means there are 10 outcomes that are simply just for children. We're going to talk about these in the next two slides. If you look at this slide here, the factors and indicators for Children and Youth Manual are the same as they are in Adult POMS Manual. So that's what you see on the picture side: my human security, my community, my relationships, my choices, and my goals. The next two slides are just simply organized around children and their families. So what we look for children and youth are children and their families are connected to natural supports. Children and their families exercise rights. Children and their families are treated fairly. Children and their families experience continuity and security. Children and their families decide when to share personal information. The next slide, you'll see the rest of the outcomes that are for children and youth, but also for their families when making decisions and for your interview consideration. Children and their families choose where and with whom they live. Children and their families choose developmental, academic, and/or vocational priorities. We also like to say careers. Children and their families choose services. Children and their families choose goals. Children and their families realize goals, and children and their families are respected. It's important to keep these outcomes in mind as part of the interviewer considerations, and we're going to talk a bit more about the outcomes for children and their families a little later in the webinar. Okay, when you think about considerations for children and youth when you're doing a Personal Outcome Measures interview, the application for children and youth presents some unique considerations as compared to applying the Personal Outcome Measures with adults. These differences in application fall into categories of age, family involvement, choice making, core interventions, and transitions. Well, control over decision making increases with age. And we know that some young children make some decisions. And then when you get to be a young adult, you may make many. Adults are assumed to be competent to make all their choices and decisions unless they've been adjudicated otherwise. Children, however, make varying types of choices and decisions based on their age, their capabilities, and their opportunities. The transition from childhood, which is around age 5, to adulthood, under the age 18, covers about 13 years, but it's a time period during which people learn the fundamentals about individual responsibility, sharing, group dynamics, delayed gratification, and other abilities which allow them to interact with others in their environments. The responsibility for choices and decision-making is part of the developmental process. So as a child matures, they're given more opportunities to make choices about their daily schedule, their social life, their school or work life, personal style, friends, and their future. There's really no curriculum that suggests an order or specific ages for decision-making because these decisions flow out of the situation life presents: birth order, living situation, safety and health considerations, family dynamics, individual capabilities, as well as capabilities around choices. Any or all of these can impact any child or a young person's opportunity to experience decision-making in either positive or negative ways. So when interviewing making determinations, we need to attend to age and developmental stages. So while ages 5 to 17 legally have the same rights, many more freedoms and choices are typical for a teen versus a grade school-age child. For example, parents of most 5-year-olds will make decisions about with whom and where the child plays, but most 17-year-olds choose who they hang out with and where with more limited input from parents. The best gauge for choice making really is given by looking at the kinds of decisions most children or young people are making at that approximate age range. It's important to provide children with opportunities to experience the same kinds of things their peers are experiencing without regard to our interpretation of what the benefits or results will be, which I know as parents and care providers that can be kind of tough sometimes. This protective attitude, though, has meant that some people have been isolated and kind of starved for stimulating activities and often denied opportunities. We will always be responsible to assure that children and young people maintain their foundation outcomes of rights, health, safety, and freedom from abuse and neglect. We want them to have connection to natural support networks and continuity and security. However, these foundations should not be used as excuses to prevent people from experiencing life and taking risks that are inherent in everyday life for each of us. Advance, please. So we want to look at who can serve in the role as a family, and this is often confusing for care providers and people who work with young children and young people. And not all young people have natural families that are willing or able to provide them with the support, care, and relationships that they might need. The special situations in which a child or young person has been removed from their natural family, we'll talk about later with regard to court interventions and so on. It is important to consider that various people may serve the role or parts of the role for some children and young people. And for the purpose of personal outcome measures for children and youth, family may be any of the following. Could be the child's birth family, including perhaps a step family. Advocates may be a foster family, adoptive family, staff from the organization or other support networks, or legal decision makers. When we look at family involvement, we look how families play a different role in the lives of children and young people versus adults. Adults are responsible for themselves. Families are responsible for children and young people. Since this is the case, families set the boundaries and are directly involved in making decisions about the services and supports a child or young person may receive. It's important to remember that definition CQL uses for quality in this instance is responsiveness to the person. So when we think about personal outcome measures for children and youth, you'll see that some outcomes say children and families, while other outcomes say children, that we had talked about in the previous slide. This is based on the roles that families traditionally play in all children's lives, such as choices about goals, family life, looking at satisfaction and achievements and rights. Other outcomes relate directly to the child, such as children have the best possible health and children have friends. Just one additional thing I want to mention, children and families are respected is about how people are treated by not only the service and support system, but the community overall. So think about that for a lot of the young children and families and young people we support. This outcome is interpreted in the same way as the outcome for adults. Think about that though. Respect for families' culture, religious affiliation and beliefs, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and other possible differences are clearly stressed. Okay, court interventions. Well, first, concern for basic protections of health, safety, and welfare may result in child placement outside the home via involvement of the judicial system. In these situations, choice can be limited. There is, though, a frequency of trade-off in terms of outcomes. So, for example, the child or young person does not choose where to live, but health, safety, and freedom from abuse and neglect are enhanced by placement. Neither the child nor the family might be satisfied with the services, yet other outcomes are enhanced. So to help the person be safe and free from abuse and neglect, sometimes they might not get to choose where and with whom they live. So when we talk about children and youth who do have court interventions, we need to consider that the natural family involvement may be limited. There may be no natural family involvement. And also really need to understand and review the clarity of the court order. Advance, please. Transitions. You know, traditionally services and supports have not done a great job for transitioning young people into the adult world. And oftentimes young adults just become ineligible for services they've been receiving, and then they're kind of instructed to kind of go to and contact adult services. And we know that services and support should begin to bring up the need for transition into adulthood and adult services probably before, but definitely during high school years, younger if possible. And this includes information regarding the shifts in rights and decision-making from the family to the person and what that transition looks like. And also the supports and services that both the child and family need to kind of go over that area of from going from limited decision-making to greater decision-making skills. And families should be involved in these discussions, classes, as well as the person. Service and support planning for children and young people should also use a developmental model. As the child matures, planning and participation should be transitioned from family to the person. Children and young people should have personal goals on their plans, way beyond academic, developmental, or vocational priorities. And by the time they reach the age of 18, the plan should support the personal outcome. People choose personal goals. Families want to assure that young people begin to have experiences regarding work in their high school years as well. And these could be opportunities to explore the world from career point of view. What does a child interested in school? What could that look like in their life as they grow older? Real work promotes self-esteem and plays a huge role in defining each of us as individuals. Work exploration experience is vitally important to a person's future, whether will they have meaningful and challenging ways to spend their time. Before we get into the specifics about the different age groups that we're going to be talking about today, I want to review some basic overall considerations when interviewing family members with or without the child present. You want to certainly explain the purpose of the interview and thank them. Ensure that the family member knows that you will be focusing on the child but may need their help to answer some questions. Depending on the location of the interview, you want to see if there's a way to accommodate the child if they don't want to stay. And that may happen and may have already happened to some of you. I know it's happened to me. Whenever possible, ask the child if it's okay to get mom and dad's help when they can't answer a question. We want to be watching for signs that the child's getting bored and wants to do something different. You know, you want to play, change the subjects, offer a break, or support the child to go someplace else even. And then, as indicated in the last slide, if the child or young person leaves, make sure you ask the child permission to continue talking to the family member. It's so important to have the child understand that this is about them and that they really are in charge of this conversation. Remember to keep judgment of your words and tone. As a parent myself, I know sometimes that's hard, but we really just want to engage the child, engage the young person based on who they are, where they're at that moment in their life. Be ready to listen. Every family has a story to tell. Certainly, at least most families do. And it's amazing when you have someone's talking to you and you have a listening ear, how much information families really do want to share with you. And you're seeing the big bold letters, abuse, neglect, and this is there because sometimes in interviewing young children, we kind of want to talk with parents and the child about discipline style because things come up like, I was a bad girl, or I was a bad boy, or I was punished, or things like that. We just want to be aware of the information we're getting and how we're going to, kind of talk to the child or the families about that. As we go through this webinar, we have a lot of good developmental characteristics to talk about and some strategies. It's always important to view children and young people as they are in the present, not based on their developmental characteristics or their past. We're going to share those with you, but it's really just a reference point. So something to remember is that we know that every child is gifted. They just unwrap their packages at different times. What we're going to be talking about the rest of the webinar is strategies to look at developmental characteristics for ages 5 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 13, and 14 up to the age of 18. We're going to be talking about interview considerations, strategies for success. Any kind of tool picture might want to pack along for the interview, all sorts of activities, games, and so on. And we're going to be sharing stories and highlights from our experiences from each of the age groups. 5 and 6-year-old developmental characteristics. Now, we all know when we're doing this that every child is different, just like I mentioned in the slide before. At this age, though, there's a strong desire to please adults. We know attention span varies with each child, but it grows throughout this period. Children can start to understand that others may think differently from them. They become more concrete thinkers, and things and ideas are categorized as good or bad or right or wrong. And that's why when I talked about the one slide about thinking about what a parent's disciplinary way is to look at some of the words good, bad, right, wrong. Children can be boastful at this age. Show off is learning to compare self to others. Making choices important to kids. Kids at this age love to show off their talents, and they start to develop improved self-control skills. They start to show improved ability to maintain emotional stability. When we're talking with young kiddos, we're thinking about some of the questions and when we talk about our interviews. So you want to really consider breaking down some of the words and the verbiage into shorter conversations instead of one long conversation. You want to think about, does the child want their parent to participate? You know, making sure, once again, that it's clear that this is their interview. It's important to reinforce that all their thoughts are okay, but there really is no right or wrong answers, and that's important to reiterate since that age group does kind of think in that kind of black and white concrete thinking that right or wrong, good or bad. So we want to make sure that we're thoughtful of how we respond to some of their answers. We want to look at our body language. You know, we kind of want to have that matter-of-fact kind of way of being when we're talking to kiddos this age. Let them guide the conversation, let them be in charge, and follow their lead. Follow where they go and come back to some other questions if you need to later, but give choices about things they want to talk about, and that's very important. One of the things I might suggest too for kids this age, as well as, you know, many kids, we might want to divide your interview in a couple of times depending on the person. You know, you might want to just, the attention span not be long enough. You may only get a half an hour. You may only get an hour. You might have to divide that time up, and also look at different locations for the person. Observe the kiddos doing different things. You might want to make up games as you go. You might talk about, okay, we got Cokes and candy bars at the stop and go. Where are we going to go next? Just kind of get that conversation going, but keep the questions simple. And, you know, if you can have snacks, that's always good, but make sure you get permission. Reword concepts such as intimacy, continuity, and security. Those are big words that we want to really think about when we're talking to kids about that. Think about integration. That's such a hard word for us to explain to adults, but think about what you might talk about kids when you talk about integration. There's still concrete thinkers who are growing with their vocabulary, so be very careful about keeping it as simple as possible. You might want to sit by his side, sit on the floor. I've done that. Doing something together. It's often better than sitting across the table or desk. I don't know that I've ever done that. I think I'm usually sitting next to someone. Usually I'm on the floor, or I'll share later a story about sitting on the floor and on the couch. You might want to drop family, friends, and where they'd like to go for fun, and who they talk to there, and what they do, where they shop, and so on. Toolkits. Crayons, markers, paper, extra big paper, cover a whole table if you can, if you're going to use the table, or on the floor. Mats on the floor are great. You'll see in this slide there's a poster. It's called It's All About, and there's an arrow that goes to a box. The child is supposed to draw a picture of themselves. I've actually done that with kids and drawn mine, and they've drawn theirs. Remember, you're going to be sharing some stuff about yourself because kids are curious, so it's the curious age. They're going to know information about you, and that's okay. So I've used this particular poster. I actually got it at a dollar store, but you can find a lot of different types of posters like this. You can Google it. You can buy them from Amazon, I'm sure, and a variety of other places. You might want to have small people figurine, Lego people. It depends on the child that you're interviewing if you know anything about them beforehand. Any kind of blank paper so you can fold it, make paper airplanes, cut snow plates, make boats, Play-Doh or clay, and definitely a sense of humor. This is a story about Anna. This is a young child that I interviewed. She's 6 years old, and at the time of her interview, her mom, at least at that time, was not in her life. She lives with her grandparents, and it took place in a school setting because her grandparents weren't able to speak with me but wanted her to be part of it. So this interview kind of took place in a play area in the school. There were already games and other activities that were available, but I brought my own, and that was always exciting to have someone have a bag and bring your own things. So I had crayons and a poster, the one I shared with you, It's All About Me. I also had stickers, and Anna wanted to give them to me and to her while we spoke. She said she wanted to give me a sticker when I did a good job. I also had some puzzles and a photo album with pictures of different outcomes, as well the same copy of those pictures on my laptop. We talked about what we're going to chat about. We talked about what I was doing with the interview, and I thanked her for having me there. I let her know that she could ask any questions and told her that I was going to ask some personal information and ask things that might be uncomfortable, and that she didn't have to tell me everything, and she didn't have to answer any questions if she didn't want to. The book of photos that I brought with me were quickly ignored, and the laptop was both interactive and more engaging than the photo album. In fact, the photos on the laptop was more fun for Anna because she could flip through them, and she really led the conversation. She was able to direct the conversation through looking at various pictures on the laptop. And once we were through with the pictures on the laptop, she was interested in coloring the poster All About Me. She would periodically give us both stickers for doing well, and she didn't want bathroom breaks. However, the conversation was diverted based on other activities she wanted, so it was about every 10 to 15 minutes a different activity. Then once she was done coloring the poster, she decided to work on some puzzles. And while Anna was involved in her activities of choice, I was really able to talk with her about various items related to the outcomes. It was evident that her grandparents were natural supports, and she actually didn't want to talk about her mother, which was kind of sad, but it was understood. She actually decided to play another game that involved the house and putting furniture in the house. And with this activity, we were able to talk about her neighborhood, her friends and grandparents. Because we were in a school setting, I was also able to see her classroom and things she liked to do. And I found out that she was a group leader, which was kind of an emerging social role for her. The interview was over in an hour and a half, which actually was surprising for a 6-year-old. The activities in this case were very helpful. The follow-up was with a teacher. And in this case, well, in most kids' cases, for kids this age and older, it would be best to also talk with grandparents or any kind of parents, even if it was on a different day. And that was Anna. Okay, personal outcome measures with children interviewing 7 to 9-year-olds. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to talk about those developmental characteristics, interview considerations, strategies for success, toolkits, stories, and highlights. So some developmental characteristics of a 7 to 9-year-old. Early in elementary age, children start logical thinking, which means that rather by accepting what they see as true, they begin to apply their personal knowledge and experience to situations to determine whether it makes sense or not, which is really a cool phase when you're interviewing young children. They really start to have that inquisitive, much more inquisitive approach with your questions. They have a desire to adhere strictly to rules and be fair, which can sometimes lead to conflicts during organized group play. And as children at this age range grow, they start developing and testing values and beliefs that will guide present and future behaviors. They may have more same-sex friends, have strong group identity, increasingly defining their self through their peers, work cooperatively towards shared goals, consistently recognize the views of other people, and communicate needs and wants in more socially appropriate ways. So some of the similar interview considerations may be a little bit different. You want to talk about who's going to be part of the interview. Consider making an appointment with the parent and the child to review what you want to talk about. This might even be more important for kids this age because they kind of wonder what's going on. Why are you meeting with me? What's happening? You know, at this meeting, you want to talk about the right place, location, time, and who's going to be present. And having pictures, have lots and lots of pictures. A kid-friendly document, something that's more than the overview guide that we use in CQL. In fact, the photo album that I referenced and the laptop would be great to use as a pre-meeting and at the interview because they can see what they would have before. And when you have the meeting, then they can see that you're using the same document that you shared with them the day before. You might want to take time to talk to the child alone, then ask the parent or family or whatever support network would join. But that would not necessarily be part of the follow-up interview. Strategies and toolkits for 7 to 9-year-olds. Again, consider the location. What environment is most comfortable for the child? Again, the right person to be present, the right place to have the interview, and the right time to have the interview. It really matters more specifically with this age group. You want to have the child help you set the ground rules. So have them say, hey, how do you want to go about this interview? We showed you this material yesterday. We have this book we're talking about. And so you're going to help me set the ground rules. If you can, you want to have a lot of snacks available. I always like to do that for all people I interview with permission and with considering dietary needs. But that really is kind of a way we all communicate. Oftentimes we sit down and have a cup of coffee, or we might have a soda or water and some snacks. It kind of gets the conversation going. I have a variety of activities, books, paper markers, games, and computer available. This is a story about a young man named Jack that I interviewed who happens to be 9 years old. The conversation took place in his home, in his living room. And initially, he was very interested in sitting on the couch next to me while I talked about our conversation. And we talked about why I was there and what we're going to talk about. And we talked about he can ask questions too, and he asked a ton of questions. And I hope I answered the best I could. I think I did. I also told him again that I was going to ask him about personal information, that it was definitely okay, that he didn't have to tell me everything or answer any questions if he didn't want to. So he was real excited to get right into it. I showed him the photo album that I talked about earlier with many pictures that represent all the outcomes. He picked some random pictures from the books that he wanted to talk about. So he really led the interview. It was not from start to finish. He went all over in and around the album. And using the photo album lasted about 15, maybe 20 minutes, and then he decided he wanted to sit in his beanbag chair. So I asked if I could see his room, and he just pointed down the hall and indicated where it was. And I asked him to show it to me and said, nah, not now. Not now. We're not going to look at it now. So the rest of the conversation really was driven by him. He sat in his beanbag chair. We talked about his family, school, and things he liked to do. I brought some markers and activities that had pictures for him to draw, and he'd talk about his life, and he worked on that for a while. He had some snacks, and then he talked about where he would buy those types of snacks. We talked about what he likes to do around his town, shopping, hang out with his friends, and activities he liked. And he told me he liked sports, and particularly he liked to go camping with his friends and fishing. I also found out that he was in Boy Scouts at one time. After a bit, I asked if I could sit with him on the floor some more and talk about more things. He said, yeah, but he wanted to play Mario. And you will know by that, playing Mario, that the conversation only lasted about 5 more minutes. And I asked if he wanted me to leave, and he said yes. The follow-up with Jack was with the support staff. I did happen to speak with his father the next day, and his father told me that Jack really liked talking to that Betsy lady and wondered if I'd be coming back. With Jack, it would have been also nice to divide the interview into another time slot, because I really think that getting him out of the environment into a different place, whether it's school or a play area, would have been helpful. And of course, talking to the family is always beneficial in these situations. I think, Kristen, you're going to be reviewing this part.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
I think so.
Yay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Betsy. That was super helpful. I'm going to be talking about continuing with the different developmental stages, talking about 10 through 13-year-olds. And as you can imagine, those ages, it's a huge time of change. It's really emerging from the childhood and starting into the adolescent years. Advance, please. One of the things that's happening over this time period is that the child is becoming a little bit more independent from the family. They're able to see themselves as an individual, a little bit more autonomous, and starting to really think about themselves as an individual, aside from just a family unit. They begin to see the point of view of others more clearly. They have an increased attention span, which can be really helpful when you're starting to do those interviews. Betsy had talked about you really have to keep an eye out for boredom during interviews, and that might be constantly the case during interviews with adults as well. But as their attention spans tend to get a little bit longer, hopefully they have a little bit more thoughts behind what they're talking about. They're able to express themselves a little bit better through talking, and you can really have some really thoughtful and deep conversations. And during this time period, they also get a stronger sense of right and wrong and develop a sense of empathy and being able to see outside themselves and into the world a little bit more. So really this can lead to much more meaty interviews where you can get a little bit stronger of a viewpoint and really figure out what's going on. So, some of the things that are going on is huge body changes during this time. So that's definitely something that is, as an interviewer, you need to be really conscious about. They're definitely more concerned. Some people are. Again, all these things are just kind of outlines. No two people are exactly the same in the world, and no two adolescents are the same or two children are the same. But these are just kind of a big picture guide of things that could be going on. So some people during this time period, as their bodies are changing and growing, they have more concern about their body image. They're worried about more about their look, what they're wearing, and kind of seeing themselves in a more judgmental way than previously. They tend to focus on themselves. They go back and forth between the high expectations, and they also have a lack of confidence that comes with the unknown and not really knowing what's going on, how they're going to work into this whole big picture world. They tend to experience more moodiness. So I would say insert eye roll here because that tends to happen a lot. A lot of eye rolling, a little bit more moodiness, which when you're scheduling the interview and planning for the interview, you really need to keep your mind out for that because you never want to cause any undue stress. You don't want to make things, more rough if somebody's having a bad day. You can give them the option of rescheduling if maybe they're not feeling up to it that day. Just something to keep an eye out. As they get older, they're showing more interest and, again, are influenced by a peer group. This seems to be a continuum throughout adolescence as they kind of move away from the familial home and away from their parents being the main influences in their house. They express less affection towards their parents, which if you are a parent and like affection, that can be a little hurtful. Not hurtful, but it can be a little hard to deal with sometimes. And they can seem rude and kind of short-tempered. They're also starting to realize that things in life are challenging. They can start to feel a lot of stress from challenging schoolwork, particularly as they start to think about the future and planning ahead in life. All right, so setting up the interview, always important. Ask who's going to be participating. Will it be, the parents? Will it be a sibling, maybe a teacher? Thinking of things like that. Who the child and the family want to participate is a big part of it. And really, what does the family want to get out of the process? Again, it's explaining the process really well so that there aren't any surprises, that they're not have some different expectations than the actual tool really does. But to be really clear about what is expected of the interview process and make sure that the parents are accepting of those things. Ages and stages. So if you think of a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, obviously they're very different levels of abilities and expressions of independence. Some 10-year-olds are extraordinarily independent, and some 13-year-olds, maybe a little more dependent. So again, there's a huge wide range that time period envelops, and it's always changing. Cultural considerations. So, you're really, as an interviewer, your role is to really observe and to take in everything that's going on. So you need to observe, be open to learning about new ideas, new cultures, what's important to a family, and really doing it in a non-judgmental way. Also within different cultures, expectations and responsibilities in regards to children may vary widely. All right, so some things to think about with strategies and toolkits for the ages of 10 to 13. So, like they say in real estate, location is everything. Consider location for maximum comfort and emotional safety. And I feel like we talk about this a lot in CQL. But when interviewing somebody, if they don't feel safe and they don't feel comfortable, it's really hard to have those in-depth conversations and get really meaty, honest answers. So that's really important. Have a variety of tangible activities. Kids always like to draw. Adults like to draw. Anything that they can do to kind of express themselves, write, things like that, just to keep their hands busy if that's what they need. You really want them to freely express their thoughts and feelings. I don't know, a lot of times I think children in this age aren't really asked their opinion a ton outside of their family. So this is a really good time to tell them that, they have a voice that matters, and it's good to express how they feel. Things you want to avoid in general. So talking to the person or the child in in this realm. Talk to them like a baby. Obviously, as they get more independent, they really need to be treated that way. Letting the family talk over them, this is a really difficult one, particularly with families that are extremely involved. But this is when it's great to say, okay, well, I'd like to hear what Jake thinks. So it takes a little bit of diplomacy and finessing, but it's really important that the person who you're interviewing, the child, is able to express themselves. Trivializing things that are important to them, that's really important to avoid, because nobody likes it when that happens. Assuming anything, you never want to assume anything. Everything is different for everyone, and it really needs to be open-minded to what. And another one I was thinking that I say to my kids sometimes is, when I was your age, so you definitely don't want to do that either, because things have changed a lot, and that's not really our role as an interviewer to do that. Advance, please. Stories and highlights. Yeah, so one thing to be really careful about when interviewing, not just children, but adults as well, is interviewer biases. I was teaching Palm's Children and Youth Outcome 4-day workshop, and there was an interviewer who went to a home to interview a young gentleman, and she had a cross necklace on, and he asked if she believed in God and if she was a Christian, because he had 2 moms and was worried that would make her not feel comfortable within his home. So she clearly said, that's not the case at all. But keeping out for those things, that things can be different, and keeping your biases at home is extremely important, particularly with children who really need to feel comfortable in a strong way to express themselves. Gender neutrality is really important as well. You don't want to make questions, assume that people have an opposite sex interest. You want to keep things open and to really keep genders neutral. Mutual trust is huge, as Betsy talked about, asking, do you have any questions for me? To kind of make it seem like, well, you're asking them a million questions, they are also able to ask you. And, the highlights to think about, big R respect. We talk about it a lot. What does that look like in all aspects? From the beginning of the interview, asking the child, what name do you like to be called? That shows respect. Where would you like me to sit? That shows respect. So really looking at all those respectful interactions from all angles is huge. All right. So we are going to talk a little bit about Jared, and it's just kind of a scenario for you to think about. So during a personal outcome measures interview, Jared, who was 13, when we were talking, he said he had the right amount of friends, was super happy with the amount he had, named them off, said all the things they do, and he did a lot of different things with them. So he was really happy with that amount of friends. And then talking to his mom, she thought 2 friends is not enough, and really wanted him to have more friends. So she made that his main formal service goal, is that's what Jared would be working on during his service time. And when we kind of talked about this, she said because of his age, she didn't think he knew what was the full scope of what was available. He hadn't had the experience to know that 2 friends was enough. So when you think of this, who does the outcome belong to? Is it Jared or his mom? And is this outcome present for Jared and his family? So that's kind of a tricky one. And again, as our age increases, as children's age increases, their choice-making autonomy increases as well. So when we go through the actual outcomes, what belongs to the child, what belongs to the family, having friends, the type and frequency of friendships belongs to the child. So at this point, the outcome belonged to Jared. It was really important to his mom that he explore this a little bit more, and he was willing to do that for sure. But thinking about exactly at what age can you choose how many friends you would like. So just something to think about a little bit. All right. So next we're going to get into the adolescent children, 14 through 18-year-olds. Advance. And as you can see, that's kind of a theme that the independence starts increasing, familial involvement starts decreasing a little bit, thinking about the future increases. There's a lot going on, but So Erickson, who was kind of like the godfather of developmental theory in regards to children, came up with two questions during this stage to describe it. It's who am I and who can I be? So it's really looking forward to those things. Where do I fit in the world, and what's in store for my future? So what we're looking at here is people have more interest in romantic relationships and sexuality. During this stage of 14 to 18, most females are physically mature at this time, and the young men may still be maturing. Again, body image is a big concern, can be a big concern. Typical concerns include body size, shape, or weight. Advance, please. So relationships are changing, again, like we talked about. Peers are becoming a much bigger influence. People want to hang out with their friends. They want to spend less time with their parents. Also, hopefully at this point, which I haven't found yet with my teenage daughters, there's less conflict with parents. They're kind of settling into a routine, kind of figuring out what their role is. They learn more defined work habits, particularly, if they want to have a job or get more money. Work's a big part of that, so they tend to hone in on that. They show more concern for future and work plans. They're better able to give reasons for their own choices, which is also helpful during an interview because you can ask, well, what was the reason that you want this? And people can really follow up with some concrete choices. So they also take on more responsibilities at home, at school, and at work. Advance. So again, things to think about. Help them feel safe and comfortable. The best way to get a lot of information is to have people feel safe and comfortable and make it really a nice organic conversation. Open-mindedness is huge in all interviews. I would say especially at this age between 14 and 18. Thoughtfully wording questions. Again, this is true with all interviews, but I think it's especially true in this age demographic. I know sometimes you can say things offensively that you don't think is offensive. So just be careful about how you say things. Assurance of trust and safety, that you're not going to say what they say to anyone else unless they want you to, and that they can trust you to not, make a big deal out of things that maybe they want to be kept private. You need to look at school as a large part of the environment. Really, the home isn't the main central location at this point. It's really looking into the school and the world and kind of what's going on around them. All right, so some strategies and toolkits. So you want to plan, have the conversation somewhere where the teenager would normally spend time. If the teenager is comfortable with it, walking and talking is great. A little exercise, the talking always works well if that's a possibility. A local coffee shop, somewhere where they can really open up and feel at ease. You want to include the parents, caregiver in part of the interview, but also you really want that one-on-one time, particularly with the teenager, because they have a lot to say about their lives, as they should. And you always want to ask permission again. You want to offer less of an adult authoritative vibe, converse on more of a peer level if possible. A lot of times adults are talking to teenagers kind of from a way up here standpoint, but you really want to bring things down at their level and help them feel, understood and heard. Constantly assure confidentiality and safety in the conversation. Again, if people don't feel safe, they're not going to want to share too much. All right, so just some quick strategies. Be prepared for tough subjects to come up. Sexual experimentation, self-harm, eating disorders, bullying. There are things that teens are often experiencing and are seeing on social media a lot. So be ready for those to come up and think about how you can do that. Everyone's different. Some teens at this age enjoy shock value. Others can be quiet and maybe annoyed by a barrage of questions. Let them pick the flow of the conversation. Non-judgmental inquiry is a must. Leave your values behind. Teens are more aware of culture and gender differences and can be easily offended by language that's not current and respectful. So if you don't understand exactly what someone, what pronoun to use, ask them to help you understand. A lot of times they'll enjoy that. Be very aware of gender pronouns and assumptions and judgments regarding sexuality and family makeup. Don't always assume a nuclear family. Don't assume, heterosexual relationships. Don't assume those kinds of things at all. You want to focus on the future. Teenagers are beginning to plan more for what they would like to do as adults. All right, so technology. I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it a little bit. I know we're starting to wrap up a little bit, but so according to research, 95% of teens use a smartphone and 45% report being online, near constant basis. So as an interviewer, what that means for you, you need to be open-minded to technological communities, gaming, dating, as well as the social importance. You know, the internet, people have their own persona on the internet. So you want to keep that in mind. Also, technology is ever evolving with teens and society, and it may be a great starting point for conversation. You know, have them show you the apps that they like, the different filters on Snapchat that they like, and talk about why they like them. And you can use the phone as a point of conversation for them to show you things. Where you may bring, you know, toys for littler kids, maybe use the phone, you know, to your advantage for older teenagers. All right, so really quick, there's just a few highlights here to talk about Beatrice. But the 17-year-old that I interviewed who had talked about her plans for the future, she said as a 17-year-old she wanted to graduate at 18 and start making some money. And her parents had been planning for her to attend high school until she was 21. So who does this outcome belong to? Is she able to graduate early and participate, you know, in kind of adulthood? So in this situation, the personal outcome measures interview, it really offered a platform for her to say this and to really have some autonomy to say it's my decision and this is what I want. And once it was explained and kind of out there, her parents ended up understanding, and she did end up graduating at 18 and getting a job and making the money. So Joe was a shy 14-year-old who had a ton of social anxiety. So his friend group actually consisted of a Fortnite community, which is an online game that's super popular. And he talked to them all each evening. It was his thing to do. It's where he felt comfortable. It was his group, his tribe. Joe was happy with the type and frequency of these interactions. So the question is, do online communities count as social roles? So I think, and particularly with Joe, maybe not so much a social role as it counts as kind of friends and a social group, but just something to think about, because these are questions, you know, particularly with technology that I think didn't exist 20 years ago, obviously. So thinking of these things, and again, it's ever evolving. So that is developmental strategies and highlights of the 14 through 18-year-old group. So I will turn it back over to you, Betsy.
You know, that was really interesting to sit and watch and to listen to. I hope all of you appreciated that as well. Looking from the developmental characteristics and interview considerations and strategies that we found were successful and toolkits we found successful and our stories and highlights from the ages of 5 to up to 18 were really kind of neat to listen to. I hope that you all have the similar experiences with the people that you're interviewing, the young people you're interviewing. You know, in closing, I want to share a couple of poems by Shel Silverstein, because it makes sense to me to reference something, children's poetry. I look at Underface, to me that's more the younger child, could be for anyone, but underneath my outside face is a face that none can see. A little less smiley, a little less sure, but a whole lot more like me. You know, everyone needs to have some sense of people really wanting to know who they are. Children, teenagers, and adults as well can really identify with this poem, I think. It was published in Shel Silverstein's book, Everything on It. You know, sometimes we all feel like no one really knows us as if we're wearing a mask and our true self is hidden from underneath our face. And that's what I think is representative of all kids. They're all people, but I think little kids in particular. The voice I kind of think more of as a teenager, could be for anyone. There's a voice inside of you that whispers all day long, I feel that this is right for me. I know that this is wrong. No teacher, preacher, parent, friend, or wise man can decide what's right for you. Just listen to the voice that speaks inside. And I think based on some of the information Kristen shared, you know, particularly teenagers really, really have that need to express themselves. It seems that the poem is kind of stating that there's a choice inside you whispering, and you have a freedom to decide to do things because it makes you happy and you think something may be right for you, even though you might encounter risks along the way. The idea is to listen to what you know instinctively that will lead you down that right path. And it's important to remember that no matter what happens and what you're faced with, always face your decisions on what you want to do and what you think is right. And only you can make the right decisions for yourself. So from children, young, kiddos from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to entering those teenage years, it's so important to really look and listen to what's going on in their lives. Any questions? I answered a couple of them. I don't know, we have about 5 minutes, we can answer some questions. Megan, I see there might be one question. Let's see up here. Oh, someone had asked me about interviewing a young person that it was about a child who didn't use words to communicate, and the mom was concerned about the child having some quote-unquote behaviors because of that. So my response to the question was I would still go ahead and talk to the mom about interviewing the young child and see what kind of supports the mom may need. And then the response was, so we would ignore what the mom wants to do. No, of course not. You don't want to ignore what the mom wants to do at all. I just suggest really strongly having a conversation with the mom and maybe some support staff for mom and doing some pre-planning and pre-looking at some questions. Also, maybe just picking a few questions, having a time-based interview for a person with lots of pictures that they might engage with. And definitely saying, it's time to stop the conversation, which might be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but at least certainly continue to encourage, the person to be interviewed, with or without words to communicate. And also, behaviors happen, we all have them, so really help with support the parent and the child around that. Another question said, will this PowerPoint be available to us? The answer to that is yes. I believe it will be within a week or so, you'll get a recording. Yeah. Another question is for children with developmental disabilities, how to gauge what developmental stage we think about for understanding the child. You know what? Trial and error is what I think. And Kristen, you can answer that as well. Do you have any comments about that question?
I do actually. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I think it's an interesting kind of caveat. A lot of times parents will say, well, they're only, 5 in their head, which sounds really dismissive and kind of terrible. And hopefully we're getting away from that kind of thinking. But really a child is chronologically, developmentally, emotionally, we should look at them as their chronological age first. Because a lot of times the same things that happen to typical people happen exactly the same to people with developmental disabilities. So I think definitely agreeing their age first, and then if that doesn't work, trying other things. But definitely looking for, the word kind of sounds rough, but age-appropriate activities, things that really meet them at their level, but may also meet their needs.
Right, and just try different avenues and different types of conversation and different types of keeping the verbiage a little simpler for someone, even though they might be, 13 and they might comprehend something that someone younger their age would. That's okay. You can still explain something and using simpler words to explain something. Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any. Said we answered 12 questions. I don't know if that's true or not.
Wow.
Well, it's getting close. We'll wait a few minutes and see if we have any more questions. I'm going to peek and see. Let's see. No? Someone has a question. If you would like to purchase the Children Youth Manual, will they be available on our CQL website? We actually are currently still working on revamping that, and that's going to be later this year. So, it really has some great differences in there that you could really look at to look and see the differences, how you would do the interviews and the toolkits and strategies you have. And because you're going to get a copy of this recorded webinar, that will be really beneficial for you to use while you wait for the new manual to come out later this year. Let's see if there's any other questions. Okay, very good. You'll look out for both. Okay, wonderful. Well, it is 2:59. We have, well, some places it's 1:59. We have 1 minute. We can take one more question if anyone has it.
Looks like somebody wants access to the All About Me picture, which I think Megan was kind enough to add a link of where you can find it.
All About Me? You know, honestly, that I actually got that at the dollar store, but if you want to Google that, get right on I Google everything. Google pictures about All About Me, and tons of different ones will come up. There's really kind of cool ones where there's a robot picture, and there's one that might benefit someone that's maybe age 9 or 10. It's about writing your history, writing your story. And it's all about writing something that you might do a newspaper article. That's a really cool one.
Betsy, I was able to find one on Scholastic Books while you were talking on Amazon that sells for $8 or $9.
Perfect. Wonderful. Okay, and the new manual, another question, will be made available later this year. We don't have a specific date. There's a different handbook. The children and youth, the two handbooks I referenced were adult personal outcome measures for people 18 and up, and the one that Kristen, Heikel, and I talked about today really was referencing the children and youth manual that covers children 5 and up to the age of 18. And I think that's answered most of the questions we have. And so I want to thank everyone for taking part in today's webinar. We appreciate your questions. If you have any more, please, you can certainly check in with Megan or Kristen or me, and our email's on our Who We Are page. If you want to, we also wanted to let you know that we got our information from a variety of sources, but specifically CQL and our CQL resources, our Children Youth Handbook. We also use CDC as well as the National Resource Center for Permanency and Family Connections, which was very helpful. There you go. There's the slide. So, you know, the National Resource Center for Permanency and Family Connections is a great page. Of course, CQL and Children and Youth areas are a great page, and CDC offers some wonderful information as well. I'd like to thank everyone, and our time is up as it's 3:02. I hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.
And
Thank you.
Just a reminder, if you are a certified interviewer or a certified trainer, your attendance today will be recorded in our database to meet your continuing education requirements. Thank you.